I know I've seen some reports about the Eagles are interested in him, and it's the Cowboys that are interested in him. A team like Chicago that has a very blatant need opposite Montez Sweat in the sack production that Myles Garrett has had throughout his career. I mean, there's been one season since 2019 when he had, I think that was the season he had the suspension for hitting Mason Rudolph with his helmet. Every year he's been in double-digit sack figures. That's what the Bears need. And I think when you have the draft capital that they do, the extra second-round pick, but also knowing what it's probably going to take, which are, future first in there as well, because he's not even 30 years old, you make the call because this is a long-term move that allows you to shore up a weak spot.
I was going to ask you, too, do you get the sense that it's the same level of excitement this year as it is with all Super Bowls? Or is there some fatigue because of, the Chiefs being there 3 straight years and the Eagles being there 2 out of the last 3?
Yeah, the Eagles are more of the story right now, but it doesn't feel like there's any story at all, and that we're all just playing the hurry-up-and-wait game until there's a game to talk about. There's no real intriguing storylines because we've played out these storylines. The Chiefs and their 3 straight Super Bowl appearances, looking for the 3rd trophy. What more can you say about that? And on the other side of it, we've already played up Saquon Barkley all season long. And we've talked about Jalen Hurts and the, turnaround of his season, Nick Sirianni getting this team on track after the 5th week of the season. We've been playing out these same conversations since October. So I do think that I wouldn't say there's not excitement. It just is a little bit of a lull right now in one of the longer Super Bowl weeks where there's not a bunch of news coming out, even with the coaching search stuff still happening. Like Kellen Moore kind of feels, since the Saints haven't talked to anybody else, that that's his job at this point. But there's not even, we're waiting to see what happens there and how quickly they hire him. So it's exciting because it's a Super Bowl and it's in a place that does the Super Bowl, I think, better than most cities because it's New Orleans. It's meant for this. They're sitting in a Super Bowl around Mardi Gras. They're just really good at putting these events on. But the intrigue around the teams, because we've seen these teams on the stage 2 years ago and we see the Chiefs there just about every year, feels like it's a little bit less exciting. And I'm sure the NBA trade deadline and everything else that happened this week with the Lakers probably had a little something to do with that.
Right. Courtney Cronin joining us here on Waddle and Silvy, Meller in for Silvy today. Courtney, we joke all the time, Waddle and I do, about Roger Goodell being the ultimate meat shield for the league. He gets $50 million to take the slings and arrows. Yep. But, of course, he had the State of the NFL address earlier this week. What was the biggest takeaway for you from his presser?
I think it was a combination of his press conference and Lloyd Howell's press conference yesterday for the NFLPA State of the Union that the messaging's kind of changed around the 18th game, and it does feel like, it's not as inevitable as Roger Goodell had once made it seem. I believe he said on the Pat McAfee show last year that, it's coming, and it's felt like this inevitable thing because of how it's been positioned, but that has to be collectively bargained in the agreement, and that CBA is not up until 2030. Doesn't mean that they can't go back, the owners and the players can't go back to the table to try to negotiate that. But it seems like that's kind of died down a little bit. There's a player safety element. There's the thought of the international schedule that the NFL wants to push through. How does that factor in when you're trying to get all those things done, and then you're trying to add a different game, another game on top of it? I don't think that players, and the PA stance is that no player wants an 18th game, considering they'd have to make changes to the offseason schedule, and we've talked about what that looks like with the ramp-up period in June, basically till training camp, and you don't really have much off time. It makes me wonder about the idea of oversaturation, which, of course, that's the storyline around the Eagles and the Chiefs this week. Oversaturated teams that have been at this stage before, and we're kind of tired of it. I think that adding an 18th game, as much as we all say we love football, there's going to be a bit of the oversaturation element to it that the league and the players' union have to be cognizant of.
I think it will come down to money, as it always does. If you had to project, Courtney, is there talk of when this would be implemented? Like you said, they would have to reopen the collective bargaining agreement. It's something the players would have to agree to. But is there any projection as to when this would be most likely to be put into place?
I don't know. That's the hard part because there's 4 years left on this, 5 rather. You could, they can come back at any time. I would imagine they're going to try to push the international schedule first to have the 17-game schedule of overseas teams. And that's difficult, too, because you're playing on soccer pitches more times than not, and they have to worry about the player health and safety element. I think you'd probably do that before you go to an 18th game. And to reopen those negotiations, that could end up taking a long time to get those things through, because it felt the last time around when the players really didn't get much more for a 17-game schedule. The pay didn't change, and it wasn't an extra bye week added in when those two things probably should have been addressed. Those conversations now are non-negotiables with a second bye week and making sure that players are compensated for 18 games versus the 17 they play now, and that can take some time.
Was there any Bears conversation down there, the hiring of Ben Johnson and all that goes with this season that we just put to rest?
I mean, I definitely talked about it in a couple of different places. I saw DJ Moore and Roma Dunze yesterday. They were there for Bounty, doing some promotional stuff. And there really wasn't much of a presence just in terms of, the Bears are the biggest story of the offseason. They just got the number one coach of the cycle. It's never like that at Media Week, just from, the ones that I've covered. And even big stories in the NFL don't seem to, when it is a Super Bowl, it kind of seems like those things fade into the background just a little bit. But, we're 2.5, 3 weeks away now from the NFL Combine. And that, to me, is when the conversation starts picking up again to get through the Super Bowl, which now, because of the schedule, is pushed a week back. It gives teams that just went through a gauntlet of a coaching search like the Bears did over 17 games some time to recalibrate and to not be the story of the NFL. But they're going to go back to being that in a couple of weeks when they're looking for prospects that they are interested in drafting at the Combine and going to be talking about the offensive line, defensive line, some of the problem areas that this team has to address between free agency and the draft. It's probably a nice welcomed break. I know Ryan Poles and a lot of members of the front office were able to get out of town late this week, and they're probably going to go dark for a week or two just to be able to reset. This is the time of year for everybody who wasn't on a playoff team or a team that went deep in the postseason to try to unplug a bit, and I think that's part of the reason too why the Bears have quietly, at least just for now, they're on the back burner when there's other stories to talk about.
Courtney joining us here on ESPN 1000. Courtney, I want to circle back because you mentioned it, the international schedule that the NFL is obviously driving to get a full 17 games over the course of a season. We did find out they announced the first game in Australia, the first regular season game in Australia this year, when they will be playing the Los Angeles Rams will be playing in Melbourne, and that's going to be a regular season game. My initial thoughts were, man, we know it's hard enough for teams who are traveling
they're going to leave a month in advance
to play in London. Courtney, you covered the Bears when they went to London. You can talk about some of the jet lag that you experienced, and then to ask these players to come and and play if they take their bye or if they don't. But I mean, playing in Australia in the regular season, it just seems like at some point the NFL is going to have to just come to grips with player safety or just putting players in a at least decent position of playing these international games. It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to play a game in Australia. I know why they're doing it, but it's just baffling to me when you look at the logistics.
Yeah, I mean, it's more than double the trip to London or Spain or Germany or any of the other places that the NFL has been. And that's asking a lot. That's something I don't believe that the players are going to vote on happening on a regular season basis. I mean, yes, that one for the Rams is going to go through next year. I'd be surprised with the player safety stuff because of how long it takes your body to recover, regardless of whether the bye week happens right then and there or whether it's later. It's such a grind, and you're sacrificing quality of play at some point. Mm-hmm. I understand the NFL wants to take over the world and wants to be a global league. That's a great, ambitious goal. I don't think it's what's best for the product because we saw as early as week 1 when the Eagles played the Packers in Brazil how bad the surface was. And you have to be cognizant of that, the type of surfaces your players are playing on in places that are predominantly slick soccer surfaces. That's going to be a problem for the NFL. And if you start seeing a rash of these injuries in these international games, then what does it do to your product? It makes it less watchable. It makes teams think twice about wanting to participate in that. And sometimes they probably don't have as large of a voice as they'd want to on it. I would be surprised if you had more pushback from teams on things like that, if they end up getting the schedule through to where we're seeing 17 games, whether it's, and I know this is what the NFLPA said they do not want, like the Middle East, India, continents that, they want to be global. Are they going to play on Antarctica at some point? I don't think so, just because it's a weather concern more than anything else. But I guarantee if there was a way to do it, the NFL would explore it, which I don't think that's a good thing. I think you can't spread yourself so thin as a league to the point where player safety and the health element is sacrificed because of dollars and the opportunity to create more of a global footprint. They've got a good one right now with the NFL in Europe and all of the places that they've played, with the Brazil game, now with Australia. I know it's only a matter of time before they start thinking about other places to add, but I would focus on those first and figuring out, how do you get somebody back on like a 20-hour flight from Australia? How do you get your stuff over there? The cost of that doesn't seem like it's worth it, in my opinion.
2030, there will be a game played on the moon.
And listen, it hasn't happened yet, but I guarantee you the Rams and whoever their opponent are in that game, when they come back, we're going to hear a lot of stories from players about how awful it was ultimately, because it's a completely different animal traveling to Australia versus traveling to Europe.
100%. And their bodies take, jet lag. The idea with the sleep schedule and going over to London when they did and getting on their schedule, think about what that's going to be like for teams going to Australia. They're probably going to have to spend, it's not like you can play 2 games over there, but I wonder if that's going to have to change the NFL's approach to where you're not having a team go out for 1 week on a trip that's of that magnitude and then coming back and expecting to be back to normal. You're going to have the bye week.
Yeah.
Maybe even before and after, or something. I don't know. It's a really tough sell.
Courtney, you wonder if it's almost forced to be week 1, but you can't have a bye week in week 2. So I don't know.
Yeah. How does that work?
An absolute nightmare.
It's crazy. Courtney, do you believe the Bears should be interested in Myles Garrett?
I do. I think that would be a very wise call to make. And I know I've seen some reports about the Eagles are interested in him, and it's the Cowboys that are interested in him. A team like Chicago that has a very blatant need opposite Montez Sweat in the sack production that Myles Garrett has had throughout his career. I mean, there's been one season since 2019 when he had, I think that was the season he had the suspension for hitting Mason Rudolph with his helmet. Every year he's been in double-digit sack figures. That's what the Bears need. And I think when you have the draft capital that they do, the extra second-round pick, but also knowing what it's probably going to take, which are, future first in there as well, because he's not even 30 years old, you make the call because this is a long-term move that allows you to shore up a weak spot on your defense with somebody with proven production. They have $80 million in cap space just around there. They can find ways financially to make this work. It's just going to be, what do you have the stomach for? Is it 2 first-round picks? Are we looking at a comp similar to what the Bears traded to the Raiders for Khalil Mack when he left Oakland? I don't know. I would think it'd be somewhere around there. There was a 2-year age difference, but Myles Garrett, back-to-back seasons with 14 sacks. He's been the best player defensively in the NFL for the last 2 years.
Yeah.
You'd be hard-pressed to find a team that would not want to look at him, but I do think the Bears should.
Yeah. Also tonight, the Hall of Famers will be, this class will be announced. Do you have any strong feelings about who will go in or who should go in?
I've been seeing the stuff about Eli, and is he a first ballot Hall of Famer? I think he goes in. I think it's wrapped up tonight because he apparently already knows, but Peyton doesn't. Wouldn't that be weird if he already knew and knew he wasn't getting in, and there was all this buildup around it, and then he has to wait another season? The guy was part of 2 Super Bowls. He has 2 Super Bowl rings. That probably qualifies him as an automatic first ballot Hall of Famer. But this class is not nearly as exciting as last year's, when certainly in Chicago it was exciting to see 3 players go in, and with Steve McMichael and getting in on the senior ballot. It was there was a lot bigger names, I think, last year that went in, but this next group obviously has a lot of talent because this hall is not that big, and every year the NFL honors the night that these guys find out because they get the knock on their hotel room door is a cool thing to experience.
Yeah,
no doubt about it. Awesome. Courtney, we started the show, of course, reflecting on the life of Virginia McCaskey. She dies at the age of 102 today. The Bears matriarch. She took over the team on October 31st in 1983 after the death of her father, George Halas, who we all know started the NFL. Do you have any thoughts or anything you'd like to say regarding to the death of Virginia McCaskey?
I think it's really cool that the last game that she was alive for was against the bitter rival, even though it hasn't been a rivalry in the last couple of years between the Bears and the Packers. To see them win in that way with the walk-off field goal, and maybe it was a sign of things that will get better in the future. And Virginia lived, 102 years is incredible. Like, think about how much life she saw. My grandmother passed away 2 years ago at 102. And you think about all the things that they would have lived through and all the things she lived through to be taking over for George Halas when he passed away in the 1980s, and to run the franchise, rather to not be in the day-to-day operations of it, but to be the face of the franchise from an ownership standpoint for decades. A lot of good, a lot of not so good with this team. She's seen it all. She's seen it with her family members having to make some pretty tough decisions along the way, and firing her son, and George taking over in 2011. I hope someone writes a book on Virginia and like what she did throughout her time on this earth, and just like the institutional pull that she had on the game of football. Like the Halas family, the McCaskey family, those are like the first families of the NFL. And it's really, when you're in Chicago and you like to learn about history of these teams, you can't really tell the story of the NFL without her and her background and pedigree and the bloodline she comes from. And what an incredible life over a century of this. And I know that they said in the press release it's a sad day, but I think they're looking at it as she just lived such a beautiful, incredible life. I know that death is never easy, but it's certainly all the things that she would have gotten to experience. It's a pretty cool existence to get to, walk away with that.
Very well said. Very well said. Before we cut you loose, Courtney, what happens on Sunday in New Orleans?
Well, this Jalen Carter thing's kind of worrisome right now. So he's had an illness the last 2 days, and that's affected his practice availability. We know what a game wrecker he is up front, and I think he really, whatever it is, get the IV bags, get the, cold and flu treatment. I know norovirus is going around everywhere. Yes. Again, we don't know what it is, but he needs to be better. Physically, he has to get better so that he can play, because that defense is reliant upon the pass rush in those critical situations. And I think Vic Fangio, if he wants to call the game that he wants to call, he's got to have this guy out there. But I'm picking the Eagles 31-27. That is my Super Bowl pick. Me picking against the Chiefs, what else is new? I know I won't be the only one wanting a changing of the guard there, but I think the Eagles right now are a more complete football team. They're a more explosive football team offensively. The amount of, the amount of explosive plays that they had going into the Super Bowl, it's a margin of plus 47 to minus 16 Chiefs. That's where the game should be won, but I would like to believe that defensively, the Eagles have the edge, but a big part of that is if Jalen Carter's going to play.
One final question for you, Courtney, before we let you go. This is straight from the Around the Horn playbook. If the Chiefs do win this game, should Travis Kelce hang him up, or should he come back for one more?
That's a dumb question,
It's
Jeff.
an Around the Horn question if ever I heard one.
Question.
He should do whatever the hell he wants, Meller. I could not care less. If he wants to play one more season, great. If he wants to get engaged with Taylor Swift on the field after the game, I'm not going to cry about it. I know everybody's saying that that's in the script, that's going to happen on Sunday. If it does, let them be happy. I know that we're tired of the oversaturation element, kind of bringing this back full circle to the 18-game schedule, and the Chiefs are at the pinnacle of that. We also are tired of them because they win a lot. They're really good. And even if they lose players in and out of the lineup, they're still damn good. It's a lot of jealousy. It's a lot of haterade. And, do you want to see somebody else win it? Sure. That's why I'm picking the Eagles. I'm trying to will it into existence.
I think that anybody who will willingly walk away from the game when you still have something left in the tank while Patrick Mahomes is still in his prime, that is football silly.
And your favorite. And you're his favorite target.
Yes. So we'll see. I think Travis Kelce's come out and said he's still got a lot left in him. So I don't see him stepping away anytime soon. I don't see anybody in the Chiefs stepping away anytime soon as long as Patrick is doing what he's doing. Thank you so much, Courtney. Glad to have you back from New Orleans.
Thanks, guys. Take care.